Talking about Super Nintendo games is not very easy for me. Well, at least when it comes to being objective about them. It is one of my favorite consoles ever and one that I have a ton of good memories of playing with my friends whole weekends and some week-long holidays that we have here in Brazil. Because of that, being 100% objective, especially when it comes to the Super Nintendo beat-em ups, is kinda hard for me. But before I forget, hi, I am Savino, and this is the Flying Kick. This is a subjective list, so don't come in expecting hidden gems or anything like that, because while I played every single beat-em up on the Nintendo 16-bit machine, a lot of them I was only able to play after the SNES golden years. So, without further ado, let's go to number 5. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time. Well, what can I say? I have loved this game since I first played it on my SNES. Funny story about this one, I only learned this was a quote-unquote port from the arcades well after I played the SNES version. Here in Brazil, at least in my town, there wasn't a single cabinet for the game, and even in the Brazilian gaming magazine I didn't see any mention of the arcade. But honestly, I think the SNES version is way superior. But why this game is in 5th? Well, you all know this game very well, so there's no point in wasting time telling what this game is about, but come on. It is really hard to beat the amount of fun you can have with this game playing with a friend. I spent countless nights with a good friend of mine playing this back-to-back on hard, changing characters and trying to get the biggest high score. Have you ever tried to make a run where you have to throw all the foot soldiers on the screen? I did. And failed. But I did. But sure, there are things in this game that bothers me a little. First, I think Mike and Ref are completely useless in this game. I'm sorry, fans, just my opinion, especially when compared to Leo and Donnie. I don't think the characters are well balanced in this one. The Sewer Surf level is very annoying, and the fight with the Rat King is kind of boring. Also, the Technodrome level is a little too long for my taste. We'll have a whole elevator section after beating Toka and Hazard and another boss fight with Shredder, which I must say is awesome. After that is where I think the game really shines with the time travel stuff. That's a game that I would like to have erased from my memory just to experience discovering these levels all over again. The feeling of where we will go next was fantastic, and no other beat-em up made me that curious to see what lay ahead as this one did. Alright, for the 4th place I have no choice other than to pick Batman Returns. Yeah, another Konami game, because they were killing it on the consoles back in the day. What made Batman better than Turtles for me is that, in all aspects, this was a better game in my opinion. The combat feels great, the graphics are amazing, and really, this was the closest to a movie in video game form that we could see at the time. And I was a huge fan of the movie back in the day, and still am. What made this game very cool for me, besides the excellent combat, was the small variations that it had. You got some 2D side-scrolling levels that worked more like a run and gun, that had some good platforming sections for a beat-em up and even a driving level. I liked this type of creativity from developers of yore, and honestly, I would love to see some of these things returning for story modes, but just keep it away from the arcade mode, please. The combat, as I said, is amazing. It was somewhat inspired by Vendetta, one of the best games from Konami, and you can do a bunch of stuff with your enemies. You can throw them in the background, breaking stuff in the way, bonk their heads together. It was a ton of fun. Sure, the game is not perfect, it has some bosses that can be a pain like Catwoman, and the enemy variation was very lacking. You will beat the same goons over and over again in all 7 levels of this game. Also, while it never bothered me at the time, the game is single player only, so you won't be spending the night with a friend playing this one. It can get boring seeing the same faces all the time, but as I said, the combat is so solid that you won't be bothered by the repetition. Overall, this is a very fun game, especially if you are a Batman fan, or more specifically, a Tim Burton's Batman fan. The third game, okay, here's the nostalgia in action. I don't think many of you have it on your own lists, but since this one is my list, Brawl Brothers. Let me explain, this one was one of the few original games I had back then. Yeah, here in Brazil things were a bit complicated at the time and most of us had pirated copies of most games. Luckily my father had a friend who was always going to the US and I could get my hands on some original cards, and Brawl Bros happened to be one of them. But this is not only nostalgia talk, the game is actually pretty good, with 5 characters to pick, each one playing very differently from the next, and the coolest feature in this game, picking your character. Let me explain. In this game, when starting it, you have to choose 2 characters. Even when playing alone, you have to pick 2, but you won't be able to play with the second character you picked right away. You're just removing them from the pool of bosses. Yeah, here, the characters you don't pick will become bosses in the game, and as soon as you beat them, they will recover their senses and come to your team. A cool thing here is that the game lets you change character after beating a boss. That way you can try them all without having to restart the game just to get familiar with them. The combat is solid and there's nothing to complain about here, with some good variety of moves for each character and even some OTG moves, which was really uncommon for the time. You also have an angry mode that makes you very strong after taking a couple of punches to the face, where you can throw your enemies off screen, and it is extremely fun. By the way, this one is one of those games where the Japanese version is better than the Western one. Here in the second part of the first level, you go to a sewer that, for some reason in the Western version, is a labyrinth, where you have to find the correct doors to enter and find the exit. In the Japanese version, the level is a regular one without these doors shenanigans. This never bothered me back in the day, and obviously I didn't know about the Japanese version at the time, and I was so addicted to this game that even nowadays, when I want to play it, I pick the US version instead of the Japanese one. As I said at the beginning of this video, nostalgia. Okay, the second game I think won't be a surprise, because honestly, how this game could be out of any list? Final Fight 3. Seriously, have you played this game? This game is fantastic. The graphics, the huge sprites, the amazing levels, everything in this game is incredible, with the exception of the OST, which I find only good enough. But come on, the combat in this game is great. Not only you have 4 completely different characters to pick, but you also have a ton of moves for each one, include some very cool super moves. You can see the influence of games like Street Fighter in this one, thanks to these moves, and while I'm not a huge fan of complex inputs in beat'em ups, they work like a charm here. Another thing that I think is amazing in this game is the 2-player mode, where the computer plays with you. Yeah, it isn't the best player around, but it can give you a good hand when playing the game. For me, at the time, it was like a dream that came true. You see, Final Fight 3 was released in 1995. Back then I was 17 years old and most of my friends quit playing video games because they were now adults and video games were for kids. So yeah, since the kid here kept playing, having an AI partner was pretty dope. But yeah, nothing of this matter if the combat wasn't good, and as I was saying, the combat is amazing. This is easily the best Final Fight on the Super Nintendo and the best Final Fight, period. However, the media at the time didn't agree with me because most of the publications were too fond of the game, calling it repetitive. I won't blame the magazines at the time, because while beat-em ups were still popular in 1995, their popularity was winding down fast at the arcades and at home 3D gaming was starting to get common, so having a classic beat-em up in an aged console wasn't what most people were looking for. But yeah, they were all wrong. Okay, the first one and the undisputable best beat-em up on the Super Nintendo. In my opinion, I think it's good to make it very clear here. So, if you follow my channel or my magazine, look, a plug! Brawler's Alley magazine is available for download for free at brawlersalley.com, that's brawlersalley.com. It will be no surprise for you to learn that for me the best SNES beat-em up is no other than Super Double Dragon. Actually, Return of Double Dragon, the Japanese version, but I will call it Super here. Look, I know the game is incomplete, has no story, no proper ending, and has missing effects, characters, and a bunch of stuff. We all know the story by now, but yet this is one of the most solid combats in the whole Super Nintendo library. First you have two different types of attack, your punch and your kick. For me, this alone always made the difference when playing Double Dragon, because even though the characters were just palette swaps of each other, you can have different styles of fighting depending on the player. Not to mention that this adds some cool variation to your attacks. Second, Super Double Dragon had an amazing blocking counter mechanic where, if you hit the block at the right moment, you can get hold of your enemy and punishing him beautifully. Not to mention that you aren't defenseless when holding an enemy like in many games even today. Here you can give a back kick to keep any enemy at bay. This was a huge deal for me back in the day and something that I missed in other games for years. Blocking meant that you weren't always vulnerable to enemies' attacks, and more than that, you could use their attacks to your advantage. It was groundbreaking, but for some reason lots of people don't realize it up to these days. Oh, and you also has this awesome kick that could stun your enemy immediately. There was a certain ferocity to this game that it wasn't very common to see. The way Billy and Jimmy beat the living heck of their enemies was visceral, you could feel and see they were pretty pissed. There are only a few weapons that they can use in the game, but they are all very satisfying, especially the nunchuck and the bow. Also, the game had a cool system where you could use a special move without having to worry about your life bar. Here, if you hold the shoulder buttons, you can feel a bar near your health that allows you to unleash 3 different special moves. This was also uncommon at the time and was so well implemented that it's pretty hard to exploit its use. Super Double Dragon is a game that I have a ton of memories, and while I know many of you would never put this game in first place, for me at least it was the best of the SNES and honestly, it still is among the best ever made in my opinion. By the way, the game is coming to modern system this November and this video was a huge spoiler for my review. And that's it for the video, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed this small list of great games from one of the best consoles ever made. If you guys have a suggestion for another topic, tell me down below and post your faves from the SNES, Genesis or whatever you want. And for those who voted on Mayhem Brawler 2, don't worry my friends, the video is coming anyway. Other than that, I hope you all have an awesome day and remember, keep it up.